Today, I want to talk about the importance of self-delusion in the creative process. I'm talking about healthy, productive self-delusion, not destructive self-delusion. Because I believe that self-delusion is strategically employed is one of the greatest inventions in human history. It's right up there with the wheel, the light bulb, the waffle maker. And if we didn't have self-delusion, then humans would not have accomplished nearly as much. Let me give you a little background about how I came to this conclusion. I am a writer at Esquire magazine, and I also write nonfiction books. And what I like to do is I like to immerse myself in my topics, dive in and become a human guinea pig, and see how it changes me. Now, a few years ago, I wrote a book about the Bible, and I tried to follow all the rules of the Bible as literally as possible for an entire year. And this came about because I grew up with no religion at all. As I say in the book, I'm Jewish, but I'm Jewish in the same way the Olive Garden is Italian. So, no offense. Great breadsticks. But I wanted to learn about the Bible. I had a young son. I wanted to know what to teach him about our heritage. So I decided one way to learn about the Bible would be to dive in and learn it from the inside out, live by the rules. So I got a stack of Bibles, and I got a board of spiritual advisors. So I had rabbis and ministers and priests. And then I wrote down every rule that I could find in the Bible. And as you might know, this turned out to be quite a long list, hundreds of rules. And I wanted to follow them all without picking and choosing, see which improved my life, which didn't. I wanted to follow the famous ones, the 10 Commandments, love your neighbor, be fruitful and multiply. By the way, I was fruitful, I did multiply. I had twin sons during the year, so I take my projects very seriously. But I also wanted to follow the not-so-famous rules. Leviticus says that you cannot shave the corners of your beard. I didn't know where the corners were, so I just let the whole thing grow. And you can see the progression. There's another, and there I am at the end. So, yeah, as you can imagine, I spent a lot of time at airport security. Now, and here's me in Times Square. The sheep was not with me all the time. That was a rental sheep, but gives you an idea. Now, it was an incredible year. It's life-changing, mostly for the better, not all. But it was also the most challenging year of my life because it was challenging in two ways. First of all, I had to abide by rules that do not jibe with modern American customs. For instance, the Bible says you cannot touch women during their time of month. And if you take Leviticus really literally, you cannot sit in a seat where a menstruating woman has sat, because then the seat is impure. My wife found this offensive, so she sat in every seat in our apartment while she was menstruating, and I had to stand for most of the year. But it was also challenging because I had to do an extreme moral makeover. I had to try to become a better person because the Bible says that you cannot covet or lie or gossip. And I'm a journalist and I live in New York City. So that's like, that's 80% of my day. So I was faced with this question, how do you become a better person? How do you do an ethical makeover? And that's when I discovered a secret. And that secret is deception, pretense. You pretend to become a better person, and you eventually become a little bit of a better person. So it's astounding how much our behavior affects our thoughts and attitudes. I always thought it was the other way around. But it's really powerful how the outer can affect the inner. And for example, during this year, I had a friend in the hospital, and I hate going to hospitals. I really didn't want to visit, but I said, what would a good person do? And I acted as if I was a good person, and I forced myself to go to the hospital. And when I was there, it sort of tricked my mind. And I said, I'm in the hospital, I must be compassionate, and I became a little more compassionate. There's a great quote from a man named Millard Fuller, who created Habitat for Humanity. And he says, it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than it is to think your way into a new way of acting. And there's a shorter way of saying this might be, fake it till you make it. And actually, I learned that in traditional Judaism, this is a widely known strategy. Their phrase is deed before creed. So you do the behavior, and eventually your mindset catches up. And psychologists will back this up. It's one of the foundations of cognitive behavioral psychology. And it even applies to the smallest of behaviors. So if you force your face into a smile position, it tricks your mind. And the studies show you become a little bit happier. It's a little creepy, but it works. So I was blown away by this strategy. And it did help me become a better person. You know, I still lie and gossip all the time, but I do it less. You know, I would say 50% less, maybe 40, 35. But I thought this is such a powerful tool that I'd like to apply it to my work life, to my creative life. And I was able to do this in a couple of different ways. The first is that if I am feeling insecure or pessimistic, which, believe it or not, happens sometimes, what I do is I say to myself, what would an optimistic, confident person do in this case? And I do that. My most recent book was about trying to be as healthy as possible. So I tried out all these new diets and all this exercise. I wrote the book while walking on a treadmill. It took me about 1,200 miles from here to Arkansas. And but often I would wake up in the morning and I'd be like, I don't know, this is too big. I'm not going to meet my deadline, just feeling really down about it. But then I'd say, well, what would a confident person do right here? And I would force myself to set up appointments with experts, and I forced myself to email my editor with plans for the book launch. And after a couple of hours, my mind caught up with my actions. Same thing with writer's block. I'm often faced with that blank screen and that blinking cursor, and I've decided my strategy is I just start typing. Doesn't matter what. The key is the actual action of my fingers on the keyboard. And at the start, it might be just complete nonsense. It could be about the pigeons outside my window bobbing their heads. But after about 20 minutes, you have enough momentum that you start to write something interesting. And you can throw away that first 20 minutes. Doesn't matter. So the interesting thing is I like to outline. So for me, the creative process is a dance. It's a balance between the planned and the unplanned. It's between knowing where I'm going to end up and just diving in and seeing what strange side roads will take me there. Two other very quick examples of how behavior has affected my thoughts. One of my first experiments as a guinea pig was about 15 years ago. I was working at Entertainment Weekly magazine, and my friends noticed I had this strange resemblance to an Australian actor named Noah Taylor. And back then, he was having a little moment in the sun. He was in a movie called Shine, which was about a schizophrenic piano player. And it was actually nominated for a bunch of Oscars. And it turned out he was not going to go to the Oscars. So my editors and I thought, well, what if I go in his stead to see what it's like to be a movie star for a night? So I did. And I put on my tuxedo, went to the red carpet. I got to tell you, it was awesome. It was, I mean, hundreds of people told me I'm brilliant. I took pictures, I did interviews. Will Smith told me I was a genius. And, you know, my ego was huge by the end of the night. You know, I knew they weren't actually talking about me, but that seemed like a technicality. So, and it lasted a few days. When I got back to New York, I remember being online at the drugstore and being like, why am I online? It was like Reese Witherspoon. Don't they know who I am? And then I remembered, oh yeah, I'm nobody. That's why. But it was a fascinating lesson in how method acting can really have an effect. And that when you do something, it will change your mind. And it's also a lesson that if you act like a jerk, then you might become a little bit of a jerk. So you have to be careful of what you pretend to be. Cut to 10 years later. My wife and I have kids, and we happen to have a beautiful babysitter. I mean, gorgeous. She's like Megan Fox hot. And my wife's friends are all like, are you crazy? What are you thinking about? But my wife's theory is that this woman is so far out of my league that it's not even a problem. It happens to be true. But this she's a wonderful woman, and she was single, so we wanted to try to find her a boyfriend. So with her permission, I put a profile of her up on Match.com with her picture. And she's fine with that. She said, I'll go out on some of the dates. But I don't like doing all that emailing business, and you do that, and weed out all the men. And I was like, great. So for several months, I was her Cyrano de Bergerac. I was emailing all these guys as my beautiful babysitter. And again, fantastic, because I was getting 50 emails a day telling me how hot I was. And it really started to sink in, and I felt better. And most of these guys, I wrote an article about this in Esquire, most of these guys were good, but there were some who were the sleaziest human beings on God's green earth. And I will give you just one of the tamer examples, which was a guy whose opening line was, I'm not a professional gynecologist, but I would love to take a look. And I'm like, you think that's going to work? And I got really offended on behalf of my babysitter. And I got in a fight with him. How could you do that? So it really taught me that walking in the shoes of someone else will give you a sense of their life. Not all of it, but a sense of it. And I thought, again, how can I apply this idea of method acting, walking in someone's shoes, to my business life, to my creative life? And I realized I can do the creative, but I'm not a natural business person. And I thought, well, what if, I used to hate speaking. I used to hate doing radio interviews. I thought the whole reason to become a writer was so that you could avoid other people. But it's not the case. There's a lot of marketing involved in writing. So I thought, what if I pretend? What if I act as if I love marketing? And so that's what I did. And I took every speaking opportunity I could, went on every radio show. I pretended I was enjoying it. And after a while, it started to work, and I started to enjoy it. And now I love it. I'm enjoying myself right now, or else I'm faking it. Now, the other thing I did was that I had to reframe the way I thought about marketing. And this was inspired by the artists Christo and Jean-Claude, which you probably know. They're the ones who wrapped the Reichstag in fabric. A few years ago, they put up 7,000 gates in Central Park, these metal structures with an orange flag fluttering in the breeze. Not orange, they would correct me. It was saffron. And I loved them, and I interviewed them. Unfortunately, Jean-Claude passed away recently, but this was before. And I interviewed them, and they told me that it took them 20 years to get the permission to put up the gates in Central Park. And I was like, 20 years? That must have driven you insane. And Christo said, well, yes, somewhat, but we like to see that navigating the bureaucracy as part of the artistic process. We like to see the red tape as part of our whole art. And I thought, that's brilliant. They have reframed this seemingly boring part of their work as art. And I thought, I'm going to try to do that with marketing. So now, when I market, I think, how can I do this creatively? How can I do it in a fun way? How can I incorporate video or live events? How can I reach unexpected audiences? For my Bible book, I thought, maybe I should try to reach out to women's magazines. How am I going to do that? And then I realized the Bible has a lot about sex and relationships. I mean, you look at the Song of Solomon, and he writes that your breasts are like two gazelles, twin gazelles, frolicking in the field. That's hot stuff. Not bad. So I said, I'm going to do sex advice from the Bible for glamour. And I did. It worked. So you can reach audiences you never thought if you think creatively. Now, there's one last final aspect of this idea of how behavior affects our thoughts. And it may seem trivial, but I don't think it is. And that is that how we move our body and how we hold our body affects our mood. And I came to this because I got interested in the Founding Fathers a few years ago. And by the way, talk about self-delusion. Those guys were masters. I mean, the fact that they thought this ragtag group of farmers was going to defeat the British Empire, that's insane. But thank God they were so deluded. But I researched George Washington, and it turned out when he was a kid, well, not a kid, a young man, he made a list of 110 rules of behavior. And some of them are very wise, what you would expect. Don't gloat when you win. Don't treat your elders with respect. But some of them were a little more surprising. There's the rule number 2, this is literally second rule, was do not adjust your private parts in public, which, that's a good rule. I would have put it a little lower, like 85, 86. But I guess it was a big problem then. That was not the only rule about your body, though. He also said that you should stand up straight. George Washington was actually known for his great posture. And it turned out, I decided I'm going to try that. So my usual posture is like hominid number 3 on the evolution chart. So I decided I'm going to try to stand up straight. And you know what? It was odd because it changed the way I felt. I felt more confident, more decisive. And it turns out that George Washington was 250 years ahead of his time. Because just recently, in the last few years, there have been a spate of studies that the way we hold our body has an effect on our minds. Recently, Harvard had a study that said when you stand up with your shoulders back and your chest out in what they call the power position, it actually raises your testosterone. And not so much, if you're a woman, you're not going to grow a mustache. But it boosts it a little, and it gives you more confidence. Same with how we walk. There's a study by a university in Florida that says if you walk with purposeful long strides, it actually affects your mood as opposed to shuffling along. So it was fascinating to me to see that when people say talk the talk and walk the walk, that really means something. You should walk the walk. Oh, and by the way, here's a shot of me standing up straight as George Washington. Now, I started with the Bible, so I'm going to end with it. When I was starting to write the Bible, I was facing a crisis because I felt overwhelmed. I felt it's too big a topic. I don't know what I'm doing. People are going to misinterpret it, think I'm being flippant. Maybe I'll be afflicted by boils. So I didn't know what to do. And this great rabbi in Brooklyn named Andy Bachman sat me down and he told me the story. And it's a story about the Bible. It's not in the Bible itself, but it's about biblical events. And he said that when Moses was fleeing Egypt with his followers, he got to the Red Sea and he lifted up his arms. And to part the Red Sea, nothing happened. It wasn't like the Charlton Heston movie. Nothing happened. And understandably, his followers were freaking out. They were saying, the Egyptians are coming to slaughter us. What are we going to do? At that point, one of his followers, named Nachshon, decided to just walk into the water. And so that's what he did. He waded in, and the water went up to his knees and his waist and his chest and his chin. And right before the water got to his nostrils, the Red Sea parted. And the moral is, sometimes, to make miracles happen, you just have to dive in. Thank you.